Well, I will second a welcome to all of you, and thanks for attending this afternoon, I guess. Looking back over millennia, questions about art, or in our case, music, have come up. Who would compose music? Why? Who would perform the music? Where? For whom? Who would listen to the music? How? When? And again, why? These questions have been answered over the centuries by tribes, churches, religions, rulers, and leaders through power inherited, imposed, or elected, and fellow musicians with opinions imposed, dictated, or of free will. In the best of times, music bursts with creativity, growth, and inclusion from every corner and crevice. In the worst of times, it's segregated, biased, bigoted, exclusionary, and banned. We don't even have to go back 100 years to find one of the lowest points. As Matt was talking about, during the Nazi regime, music was banned, which they saw as un-German, un-Aryan in their racial fanaticism. This included, of course, all music by Jewish composers, but also American jazz, which was dismissed in an ugly, derogatory way using the N-word. As was, and sadly still is so often the case with the Nazis, they needed to display all of this to the public and mounted an exhibition called Entartete Musik, or degenerate music. Now PRISM brings us generate music, or through the glories and oddities of English language, generate music, a new body of works exploring the ties between Black and Jewish Americans. And just to tie into the video here, it's presented by PRISM Quartet, curated by PRISM Quartet and Helen Haynes. And those two performances, again, are June 8th at World Cafe Live in Philadelphia. It starts at 8:30, and June 9th at Roulette up in Brooklyn, and that starts at 7. The music is by Yotam Haber, David Krakauer, Myra Medford, Diane Monroe, Ursula Rucker, Tyshawn Sori, Susan Watts, and Fred Wesley. It's performed by PRISM Quartet, which is Tymer Sullivan, Zachary Shimon, Matthew Levy, Timothy McAllister on saxophones, David Gilmore to my right on guitar, David Krakauer on klezmer clarinet, Diane Monroe on violin, Reuben Rogers bass, Ursula Rucker vocals and poetry, Tyshawn Sori drums, percussion, Susan Watts trumpet and vocals. And as Matt said, there's another discussion Thursday at 4 p.m. Charles Library Event Space, the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American Collection at Temple University. That's 1900 North 13th Street. And where I come into the picture, there will be late fall, more likely 2025, we'll figure that out. There will be a radio broadcast of this concert, and it will be released on PRISM's label XAS. For this panel, to my right, we have guitarist David Gilmore, composer, trumpeter, and vocalist Susan Watts, and composer and violinist Diane Monroe. And even though I haven't heard the pieces, nobody has, I thought we'd start with Diane and Susan, if that's okay. The pieces you wrote for this project, because they approach these ties between these two peoples in very different ways and through very different lenses. Diane, your Ironies is very personal, based on firsthand, familiar local social knowledge and experience, where one where surface visuals don't really tell the whole truth. Susan, your Convergence zooms out, as the relationship between the Jewish and African American cultures has not always been one of shared oppression and segregation, but you dive in musically into each of the two's own musical treasure chests, sacred cows, choose your metaphor, or at the very least into their own backyards, we'll say. So let's start with the two of you and talk about your pieces for this project.
Go ahead. Okay. Oh, yes. Hello. Well, wow. Well, I'll start by saying that my musical heritage, or I guess lineage, is certainly African American. And when I was a very, very young child, and once I evolved, the Jewish American music came into being, and I ended up having just as much, dealings with Black American musicians as I did with Jewish American musicians. In the younger years, with the African American heritage, I had I was, of course, not yet playing classical music with my peers, because I had started classical music when I was 4 years old at the piano, but I'm so full of everything. I can't really. There's so much to tell, and I know there's just an hour, and I have to truncate. I totally have to truncate. So let's see. All right. So what I'm trying to say is that my world, my musical world, is really made up of musicians of black and Jewish people, and my most beloved friends that I met at Lighthouse Camp years ago. Some of you may know about Lighthouse Camp. It's an art and music camp for like special artists, children, and developed relationships. And to this day, I play with these people. And I used to be a guitarist, singer, songwriter, and we used to play down at the club at Togetherness House Coffee House, which no longer exists, but you might know about the Bandbox Theater that was next door to Bandbox Theater in Germantown. Anyway, so that was a Jewish owned place where it was like hippie activist. That was the thing, and we had a great time. So that was the other side of the story. And then there was one side of the story that is the second really movement of my piece. I see it as three movements, although it's played as one. And the second movement of my piece is a contemporary, what we would call a contemporary classical piece mixed with funk and funky stuff, and that relationship is playing with a lot of my Jewish friends in building my repertoire in contemporary classical music, and then relating to Togetherness House and like having a and sticking that funk in there, and so and folk and everything. So my first movement is all about grief and strife, and it's prayerful, and it's a chant, and I have Susan as a cantor singing lines of Jewish lines relating to really where I was raised. I lived with my grandmother and grandfather, and they went to a Jewish synagogue as well as Baptist church. And we had a mezuzah on our door, and I kissed it every morning before I went to school. So there's like all these kind of ironies that went by. I had so these are running through the piece are hymns and spirituals, and with underlying Jewish music or Jewish sounding music, I'll say, and those hymns and spirituals are what my grandmother really went to. That was her go-to for comfort in times of need, and in an underlying religious, Jewish religious sense also. So I had all of these parts, and then the second morphs into this, actual conflict. It's like I guess the contemporary classical is, against the funk is, and it, depicts the, all the all the riots and all the civil rights movement and everything and questions and craziness and death and all, and us actually communicating. You know, I remember, you know, communicating so much with my Jewish friends, and we would have conversations, had so many conversations, and just back and forth, and some were pretty, some were terrible, but we did it. You know, we did it, and we're still friends. And so, and then it morphs into really what I did at Lighthouse Camp and what I did in with Togetherness House, Coffee House in Germantown, especially, which is like do the folk thing. I played guitar and I was a singer-songwriter, and that's what I did. And this tune that just came to me was just all about that friendship and that lovely joyous moments of incredible music making and just camaraderie. So that's.
I look forward to that joyous music making and camaraderie. Her piece is just, oh, it's ridiculous. It's just gorgeous. All right, what was the question? What about your piece?
What the heck did you write? Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's funny enough, my thing is in two parts as well. And the first part is a kind of it's representative of the screaming match that has gone on between African Americans and Jews in our histories together. The kind of this musically, which kind of winds its way to convergence, right? So in the beginning, you know, we have my history is my history, my musical lineage, not lineage, my musical tradition that I come to this project with is klezmer music, and which is Eastern European Jewish music. And so there's a lot of that in my piece. There's a lot of improvisation in my piece, a huge amount of improvisation that is, for instance, the trumpet will start in a doina, which is an improvisational kind of lament, and then the violin comes in, and then we're playing together, and then the clarinet comes in, and we're playing together, and then the saxophone quartet comes in, and we're all playing together, and then the guitar comes in doing oh my God, I can't believe Jimi Hendrix, right? Jimi Hendrix, wah craziness, you know. So all of these voices, you know, you have Diane's voice, you have David Krakauer's voice, you have my voice, you have Gilmore's voice, you have Tyshawn's voice, the saxophone quartet. All of these voices converge, you know, in different states of having this conversation. But the piece isn't so much about the conversation as much as it is about the convergence. So that's kind of the first part, is kind of musically talking about the tension, but also musically finding a beautiful place together. The second piece, I use some Torah blessings, just the melodies, not the words, but the melodies. There's a prayer that you read whenever you read the Torah, and so I took the music of that prayer and I start the second half with that. And basically what happens in the second piece is Lift Every Voice, that I had translated into Yiddish by Josh Waletsky. And so there's a performance of that piece in Yiddish with different flavors of Eastern European Jewish music and African American gospel music, and so there's different flavors in that. You've got the language, and that's kind of where we end up with Convergence.
As I said, two very different takes and two very different angles coming at this from both of you. Generate Music is not just a commissioning project for the new works, it's also a super group. Did you pen that name, Matt? Super group? Super group of musicians coming together to make it happen. So turning to the panelist on my right, who's part of the super group, and we do have Matt Levy here, one of the members of PRISM. For both of you, this tie in between Black and Jewish Americans and the societies runs both of you back to growing up, home, and neighborhood, does it not? So just talk about that, because it makes it very personal, I think, for both of you.
Talking to me?
I am, yeah.
Testing, 1, 2. Hello. Yes. Yeah, this is very, very cool. I'm very excited to delve into their music and be a part of this project. When Matt asked me, it immediately resonated because I'm from African American on my father's side and Jewish on my mother's side. That's my background. And I grew up listening. I'm from Boston, from Cambridge, Massachusetts. So great mix of music, and especially back in the, I guess, late 60s, 70s, when radio was a lot more eclectic and you had a mix of music. Can't say I heard klezmer music, but it was definitely R&B, rock, funk. Very excited Fred Wesley is a part of this because he's one of my musical heroes, from James Brown to, Bootsy Collins to Parliament Funkadelic, and it's just, So that's my first love, I would say, like is funk and R&B, and then I got into jazz when I started studying guitar when I was around 15 years old. But growing up in my house, we weren't particularly religious. My parents weren't, but we would have a Christmas tree, and my name is David, so I made the Star of David and put that on top of the Christmas tree. So that was our way of celebrating both holidays, sort of unconsciously, So I'm excited because I've really honestly not delved. I'm not, like I said, a very religious person. I consider myself kind of spiritual, whatever that means, but I haven't really followed any particular tradition, but I've always been excited to learn more. My older sister has sort of actually explored her Jewish heritage more, and she's gone to synagogue and things of that nature. But anyway, where am I going with this? That's my background in a nutshell. Was there a question in there somewhere? I don't know.
So, since both of your pieces, you both mentioned, have moments of musical struggle and strife type of thing going on. I don't mean to steal any thunder from David Krakauer. I know David, he's a great guy from Thursday's panel, so if you go there, I'm sorry if he brings this up. But he made a really wonderful analogy, I think it's in relation to his piece, between the calling to the heavens from the horns of giants like Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie and the shofar horn in the Jewish tradition. So I'm just wondering, as you go through not only composing pieces for this project, this specific project, the goal of this project, but also just performing them, David, can you see or any other cross-references come to mind, or you notice to correlate how people who have endured continuous outcasting from their chosen nation, country, state, city, town, village, home, pick, how these two cultures musically cross-reference one another? Even just symbolically, but musically would be better. Okay, I've stumped the panel. No one gets the dining room set. We come back next week to play another round. Thank you very much. What David said was such a stark, you can hear it, right? If you think of Dizzy wailing away and going in the stratosphere and then that shofar horn calling. I didn't know if there were other points between the rich heritage between these two groups that also come together. Do they converge at points?
In our two groups or others? Is that
no? This project is about these two groups, the African American and Jewish cultures. Musically, are there points in these long heritage where they come together?
Yeah, I think in every way, because I'm the kind of person who thinks that music is always running through, everybody's music is always running through everybody's music. So I just, I know that it's a fact that there's just more than just that one aspect, or one point, musical point. I think that the music is always speaking to us from the heavens, and we're, seriously. And I really feel that there's a piece that I had written a while back, and it was a memory of listening to someone talk about being across the ocean and hearing a certain type of music, and at the time it was someone who was who was steeped in R&B. Particularly in hip hop, right, music, and then way across the ocean, on the other side of the ocean, was a person who was East Indian, and they picked up that vibe of the hip hop, and they combined that two musics without even knowing that each other had done that, and so they heard it, but they didn't hear it. It was subliminal. It was subtle. It was of the heavens. It was like of the other. And so I think we hear that all the time. I think even the great composers of everybody from the jazz composers, great jazz composers, to the great classical composers, Western European repertoire. This is the same thing. They heard the music, the really great ones. Like you always often wonder why there's just a handful of great composers. The handful are the ones who were open. The handful were the ones who were really open to hearing everything. And I am one to always shake my finger wildly at classical music, because there's always a block a lot of the times that comes from not paying enough attention to rhythm, for instance, and a huge block. It's a historical blockage, and that's very important to me, and that sense blocks off, so to speak. It just cuts in half the evolution of music, really. We don't have that, and I think that is because of a lot to do with racism. That happens. That there's a history of not paying attention to like rhythm. And so whereas blacks and Jews have that very much in common in terms of musically and the way they react to music and the way we grow and learn from many musics, you see. And so that's, I think it's just universal that that we would relate, Coltrane to a shofar, and that sounds that we hear are just universal.
Yeah, I mean the jazz and it was created. Often people say it's it's an African American art form, but you cannot imagine what it would have developed without the multitudes of Jewish composers and performers, from Benny Goodman to Victor Young to Gershwin. I mean the list goes on and on and on and on. So jazz and music of improvisational art form has had contributions from both sides. And Willie the Lion Smith, who was African American, his father was Jewish, and one of the fathers of jazz. So that's right there. That's the There's not even an intersection. It's intertwined. It's one. It's just one entity. And so to this day, and it's a continuation. I worked with Wayne Shorter for a number of years, and he was, he hated labels, as do a lot of us, myself included, like calling something jazz, for example. It's like he's if I remember correctly, his definition was like jazz is duty free. He would call it. It's free of all. Any kind of label, any kind of commitment to or prescription of it represents freedom, and he also said jazz means I dare you, and so this is just the expression of endless creativity that comes through the melting pot that is this country, Yeah, so this is I'm very excited about this, because for me it's just like I've been in the jazz world, and this is I've been familiar with. I'm not familiar with your composition, but David Krakauer I've been familiar with, and so very very interested in delving into this.
Yeah, I didn't even think of this till after I'd asked the question, and this is not subtle in any way, but I think there's the old swing chart called "And the Angels Sing," and I think is it Goodman or Ziggy Elman's arrangement where it just breaks into the horror in the middle, comes right back to the swing dance, so it's like embedded. I know it's not subtle, but that's what came to mind as I just after I asked that question. I want to pick up a two-word phrase, Diane, you said when you were talking about your piece. Sort of turn it around. You said comfort music. So you can see this question coming around the bend. What, for all three of you, is comfort music, either composing or performing?
Well, right now, I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit too woo-woo for everybody. But I I have this. This thing that I play at night, it's like sleep music, and from Apple Music, and it's just harmony, just like very very slow, sustained, beautiful harmony, and then it just morphs when it wants to into another harmony, and then it morphs into another and it's so comforting. And that's that's my thing. I mean, I just love it so much. It's just just getting into every chord, just like deeply into it. And it's just really comforting to me. It just feels like a blanket. It just feels like you're like laying back on a blanket. It's just so beautiful, actually. Otherwise, I love Bartok. Bela Bartok is one of my favorite composers, and the comfort level is unbelievable. I mean, I feel like I'm home when I listen to Bartok, music, and I've had a privilege to play all 6 of his quartets, well, 5 out of 6, but coach all 6 of them. for many years and a lot of performing, and I just I can't get enough of it. I still listen to it, and on the other hand, it's a comfort. I've just I just love James Brown. We had a chance to play with James Brown at the Apollo Theater in 1974, and I'll just never forget that experience. And it just comforting. I was just like, how can funk music be comforting? Well, it comforts me. It is like, woo! It's like incredible. It's just like you just get down into it, and it's amazing. I mean, just to see James Brown just like take his cape and fall to the floor. It was just, it's just amazing. How about you, Susan?
Well, I think for me, comforting, like, music is comforting, like, just as opposed to compared to conversation, compared to going to see a play, compared to, like, for me, music is my language. Music is my comfort language, like you can eat like mashed potatoes and, beef stew, and that's like comfort food. Music in general to me is comfort. And because I process things orally, like I hear things, and when I hear music, it connects with a deep part of me. And being connected to myself in such a way is very comforting. Music makes me feel grounded. It makes me feel connected, and it makes me want to share my comfort with it. I do have, I love Eastern European Jewish music, and I love the American iterations of it, and that is that's like a deep in there kind of like relationship I have with this music, but I also have that deep in there relationship with early 1900s, early 20th century jazz. I have that same feeling of groundedness, of being able to manifest part of myself in the song, to be able to live in the music, to crawl in there, and to get into the music. I just find that music is my comfort. It's very just across the board comforting to me.
Well, your career, you've...
Ditto. Everything they just said applies to me.
But you've performed with such an incredible lineup of musicians. I mean, there has to be, both of you, I mean, there has to be something that when you hear it, heart rate slows a bit. There's a little bit of a feeling of safety, security, in the best sense of those words.
Well, as Susan was speaking, I was thinking of Brazilian music, which is, again, another very generic label. Right now, I'm getting into some of Villa-Lobos's pieces on guitar. I can't play it very well at all. I wasn't classically trained, but I'm trying. But I love the choro music, and I love bossa nova music and Milton Nascimento, and there's just such a vibe from that country, and it almost makes you feel like, a past life thing, and so I guess maybe that would be on the top of the list. Music from that country.
You have to realize that probably all the three of us up here, we'd say something completely different the next time you would ask.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Come back for the 7:30 panel, and this will all be different. I mean, the common denominator through all three of you, if you go really deep, is rhythm, really. in some sense, that moves you. I got one more, and again, it's zoomed out, but I mean, when PRISM approached the three of you to be part of this project, explained what the project was about, what it wanted you to do, obviously this appealed to you. So this question, again, zooms out a few thousand feet, but you know, given the atmosphere we now live in, which seemingly seems unstoppable at times, which is unfathomable, of dangerous rhetoric, governance, even violence towards both black, Jewish people here in the US, how does this project, or on a bigger screen, can music play a part to heal, reveal, change, so that acceptance is a norm? How does music play a part in that? All three of you believe that, or you wouldn't have said yes to this project, probably.
Is it working? Testing, yes. I like to think it does. I think music is a healing force in the world, and consciously or unconsciously, it does bring about change and awareness. You know, I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with the texts that are going to be shared, but the idea of lift every voice and sing in Yiddish, I can't wait to hear that. But something like that, I can only imagine that's going to, you know, bring about a certain amount of awareness, whether it's conscious or unconscious, you know. I mean, just the haunting melody of that song, written by, you know, an ex-slave, was he a captain of a slave ship? You know, just that, and I just think, you know, there's a resonance in that music, and so I just think, you know, anything that's put out with intention in this group resonates out there and brings about, it has to bring about positive change, no doubt.
I think music works in mysterious ways, right? I mean, I think it depends on who's receiving it. Like, how are you listening to it? Are you listening to it with a willingness to be influenced by something that you're not used to? Or are you listening to it judgmentally? You know, music can do whatever the listener allows it to do, right? So, for me, for this project, I have such good experiences in my life with African Americans, and I wanted to somehow represent my experiences through my music. And, you know, if a listener is going to be stuck at the door of "you're Jewish," then there's nothing music can do. There's just nothing it can do. But if you're willing to listen, if you're willing to receive, if you're willing to have some kind of reciprocity, and let the music, you said a great word, other, the other. You know, music is other. It's not one of our. It's just other. It's spiritual. It's soul-scaping. It touches things you can't put your finger on because they're other, and there's no words for it. And that's where I feel like the music comes in, and the music can be very powerful if people let it be powerful. If people let it encroach on them, and they receive what they're hearing.
That's great, Susan. Thank you for that. I ditto that remark, and I often think of how powerful it is, how much more powerful music is when we're playing it for a memorial service. how much more impactful it is. I always marvel at that, and I marvel at reactions from everyone. And I think that not only is it obvious that, you know, one is grieving and one is more open in that fact, but but also, you know, as a performer, you're really it's sort of like they're depending on your performance to comfort them, to help them, you know, and so you really see that reciprocity come full circle, you know, and you feel it. I feel it. I feel when I'm connected to the audience much more when I'm playing in that kind of environment, you know, and I strive to do that in other environments. Now it's you know, kind of common, unfortunately, again in like the classical world, for instance, where, like what Susan was saying about, you know, it's like you have to be open to it. It's like if you're listening in a certain way, if you're listening in a very academic way, you can't really be touched, you know? And it's just like it's all about being touched. And so I think that all of us are, you know, I think I'd be happy if one person out of the room is touched by, you know what I'm saying, by what is happening on stage.
You and I could talk about this other in music for hours, because as a composer, you're dealing with something you can't control, and you hope you can. It's a fascinating subject. But let me turn it around. Anyone out here have a question for these three?
I don't think I need the mic.
You're true. You're right. You do not.
The question's for Susan, but I'm going to digress for a second. Comment to Diane. The Philadelphia Orchestra recently did a fabulous performance of Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra, written at the very end of his life, commissioned by Kusevitsky for the Boston Philharmonic. It was a charitable commission. Bartók was in poor health and impoverished, and he was given this commission. Kusevitsky did not expect him to finish it. He was paid $500 to start it, and he did collect the $500 when he finished it. And that was the fee for Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra, which was like kind of mind-boggling to think. Susan, a number of years ago, I attended an absolutely fabulous klezmer concert in this building on the top floor. And as far as I can remember, it was a Watts family enterprise.
Diane was there.
Were you there?
I was there, but Diane was there.
And,
with
and
Henkes?
was your mother?
Was Henkes?
Was
Henkes Netsky?
Henkes Netsky?
It may have been. I can't
Oh, okay.
remember. But
yes, that was my mother.
but-
That was
me.
but there was a female drummer who
Yes.
was the leader of. Were you the drummer?
I'm
No,
the
your mother was the drummer.
Yeah.
Who I think may have been a graduate of Curtis.
Yes.
She was a grad. Well, I just want to tell you that it was quite a few years ago, but I still remember what a fabulous, fabulous evening it was, and that this may be an overstatement, but I think your family represents klezmer music in Philadelphia.
That's correct.
Well, it's one of the names that comes up. There are others, but there's Lemish is another name that comes up. There's Katzman, that's another name that comes up. There are other families in Philadelphia, but yeah, the Hoffman. There were so many of us. There was like 6 of them, you know, and they all played different instruments, and they all played. My grandfather played in the Philadelphia Orchestra. He played with the D'Oyly Card Opera, you know, and then his brother was a jazz drummer, and then the other was a reed man, and he was in the army, played in the army, jazz, and then came out and played the theaters. And my mother was a classical drummer for most of her career until she was reunited with her klezmer roots. And yeah, there's a beautiful tradition of klezmer in Philadelphia that, you know, we're trying to.
Well, I'm going to make every effort, now that I know that you're involved in this concert that's coming up at Royal Cafe Live. I'm kind of excited. I'm going to make every effort to attend.
Well, come say hello when you do.
I hope I haven't bored everybody.
I have a question. Like Diane, I grew up in West Philly and moved from a German American neighborhood to a Jewish American neighborhood, just 10 blocks east. And the reason I raised that is because, like Diane, I was raised as classically trained musician, but I also think because of the neighbors I had when I moved to that other neighborhood and watching Lenny Bernstein growing up on all of the concerts that you grew up with. And then later coming around and singing with San Francisco Symphony Orchestra and Michael Tilson Thomas telling stories about his interpretation of Mahler, that musicians are vessels, and we absorb things that you don't think of as specifically musical. And my example of that is I was singing some Shostakovich songs in San Francisco, and of course I was the only black performer in this group, but I was touched when this Jewish grandmother came up to me after the performance and said, "You really sound like you understand Yiddish." And I was just floored, and I just thought, I think that only came from, I could hear the cadence of our neighbors, of our older neighbors that I grew up with. And I think lots of times as a vessel and a musician, you integrate those things that you grow up with that aren't necessarily just musical influences, but are human influences about the people that you interact with as you grow up. And I have to throw in Girls High there too, because it's like the halls were empty during the Jewish holidays.
One thing that I was struck by is that, music as change agents, and how our heritage has woven in and out of each other, over the last few hundred years in this country. And it was Abel Morapole, I believe it was, who wrote Strange Fruit. And he wrote it as a poem, and which became the lyric for, of course, Billie Holiday's famous delivery of that music, and was also part of Library of Congress designated as one of the greatest compositions of the 20th century. And Abel Maripol was Jewish. He wrote Strange Fruit after seeing some news reports on lynching, in the United States, and how that song changed or helped to change so many things within the awareness about what was going on against the black body. And so that many of these compositions really are the interaction of black musicians and Jewish musicians and black writers and artists to really express our experience, in this country, both politically, socially, et cetera, are some of the things that are being expressed in these compositions as well. you know, musically and otherwise. So I just wanted to talk about that.
Andrea? Anyone else?
I can project. You pass this back. I'm a composer, and I grew up Jewish, and I related most to the music in the synagogue, and most specifically the cantorial singing, because of this crying nature of like a crying to the divine or a crying to understand truth. And it's something that I also hear in gospel and in blues and in soul. And I just wonder if that has come up for either of you as you're working with your pieces.
If what has come up? If
This relationship between the two, this idea of the music as this crying to the divine, or the crying to understand. That's something that always moved me so much.
Well, I have to say, like you, I share the love of cantorial music. I listen to an inordinate amount of chazonis, and it informs my playing. It informs how I improvise. It informs how I phrase. It informs how I get from one note to the next. It informs everything. So when I write this piece, when I hear what I hear in my head is I hear the cantorial modes. I hear the synagogue modes. I hear the synagogue, the cantorial ornamentation. You know, I hear all that stuff. But I also, like you were saying, you know, I hear that in African American music, you know, but I also hear it in, like, you know, the music of the Kazakhstani, you know, brass bands playing at a wedding. And that just takes me back to, like, music and, like, what music does. And of course it cries out to God. And of course for me it cries out to God, because, you know, I'm good with God. But but yeah, I mean, for me personally, how could it not? It could not. And when I listen to, like, Fred Wesley, oh my God, come on, this man, like, how can it be other than uber spiritual? And, you know, a horn line from Fred Wesley, if that doesn't cry out to God, I don't know what does, you know? So yeah, that whole kind of spiritual exhale, you know, just kind of finds itself in the music of people, all people, you know, and it just takes different forms. And like David was saying, like, we converge. Like, jazz is parts of jazz are a convergence of two people's musical sensibilities and how they can come together to form something, you know, new and different. But yeah, that's it.
You should write a piece called Convergence. Oh, you have. Sorry about that.
I just want to say something to that. You know, the cantor, there's also a parallel that came to my head. I just came from I was telling them, from a Sudanese wedding yesterday. My wife is half Sudanese, and she wrote actually her dissertation on the influence of Islam on the blues, and, you know, how it came through over with slaves. And, you know, so there's parallels there too, you know, with forgot now the names of the Islamic, yes, and yeah, so it all comes full circle. It's you know, and you hear it in James Brown, you know, big time. So Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah. He's convergent with us.
So
Look, we've about reached our time and some. Convergence is a good place to end on because I know that they talk in biology, they talk about this concept of convergent evolution, right? When two things in separate parts of the world and the earth converge to be very similar, but without any influence on each other. And I think sometimes we see that in music and in other times we don't. But where it is similar is that, you know, we're talking about two diasporic peoples traveling through space and time in the world, reflecting on the surroundings, the communities, the neighbors, sometimes with each other, sometimes not. Two diasporic peoples who are not one thing, who you know, you think of the African continent and you think of Mizrahi Jews and Sephardic Jews from Golden Age of Spain and Ashkenazi Jews, not uniform. Are any of those groups, you think of music and people and culture from Southern Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa. We could really go on and on for days. We're talking about two communities where music is still absolutely essential to our cores, to our rituals from birth, marriage, coming of age, death. So we're going to continue this conversation with more of the members of these groups, of this project on Thursday at the Charles C. Blockson Library, 4 p.m., also free. We're going to continue this conversation because any of these folks who don't have to rush to a train station, respectfully to one of them, will stay after and hang and schmooze. And then the conversation will continue June, help me, 6th? 8th at World Cafe Live. When we hear the clearest expression of all this, which is, of course, through the music and then a post-concert discussion.